and welcome. I'm Melissa Gradle, the Executive Director of Poets and Writers, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to a reading by the 17th winner of the Jackson Poetry Prize, Sandra Lim. More folks are joining us. It's really exciting to see the wonderful turnout tonight. I think it reflects the many fans of Sandra's exquisite work and also our collective hunger for poetry. Every event takes place in a particular context, and perhaps it's worth acknowledging some of our context tonight. First, we want to note the passing of Louise Glück, the Nobel Prize-winning poet who died on Friday. Louise was a revered member of the poetry community. She served as a judge for the Jackson Prize some 10 years ago, and she joined us in June in New York City when we presented the Jackson Prize to Sandra. And in addition, I'm sure that many of you are thinking, as I am, of the gathering violence around the world tonight in Israel and Palestine and elsewhere too. I find myself thinking of the line from Thomas Kidd, where words prevail not, violence prevails. And I think there's nowhere I'd rather be than with people who love poetry. So thanks for being here. Sandra Lim was selected as the winner of the 2023 Jackson Poetry Prize by a panel of 3 judges, Carl Phillips, Joy Harjo, and John Yao. For the first time in the history of this prize, all 3 judges were previous Jackson Prize winners. Joy Harjo and John Yao were unable to join us this evening, but they send their warm regards to you, Sandra. We are delighted that the extraordinary poet Carl Phillips is joining Sandra in conversation tonight. And Carl, thanks so much for being with us. I'd like to also extend a special thank you to Susan and John Jackson, along with Kimberly Jackson and Alex Jackson. The Jackson family has made this prize possible through an extraordinary gift from the Liana Foundation. That gift established an endowment that supports one of the most generous awards for an American poet. This year, the Jackson Prize carries a monetary award of $85,000. Poets and Writers is truly honored to be the steward of this spectacular award. And finally, just before we begin, I'm going to turn it over to Carl in just a moment, but a few housekeeping details. We recommend that you use the speaker view for the best viewing experience. So in the top right corner of your Zoom screen, you may be able to set the view to either gallery or speaker. We recommend speaker view. We also ask that you keep your microphones on mute throughout the program. And we invite you to post questions for Sandra in the chat at any point. She'll answer questions from the audience later in the program, and we'll be passing those along. So go ahead and add your questions at any point. Sandra Lim is the author of 3 poetry collections, The Curious Thing and The Wilderness, both from W.W. Norton, and The Loveliest Grotesque from Corey Press. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including a Guggenheim Fellowship, an American Academy of Arts and Letters Literature Award, the Levis Reading Prize, the Barnard Women Poets Prize, and the Corey Press First Book Award. Her writing has appeared widely in journals and anthologies. She is a professor of English at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, and also on the poetry faculty of the Warren Wilson College MFA program. Born in Seoul, Korea, she lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I'd now like to ask Carl to read the judge's citation.
Thank you, Melissa. It's a pleasure and honor to be here, especially to honor you, Sandra, and your work. Yes, I'm going to read the citation. It says, "It's tempting to think of Sandra Lim as a philosopher poet, in the school of Marcus Aurelius. Her poems address the conundrum of being a self with fears and feelings in spite of the mortality that should, in theory, put us at ease. Wielding a striking combination of cool detachment and sly humor, Lim constantly points to the mundane aspects of the world and to how we nevertheless cling to them, always expecting something more. Quote, feelings keep opening their myriad dark flowers for you, their thousand petals of thought. Lim confronts the larger defining abstractions of our lives, love, death, betrayal, the power dynamics of body and soul, in poems that ultimately defy easy category, refuse expectation, and have quietly challenged and reinvigorated the possibilities for what a poem can do and how. It's a poetry of interrogation, whose fierceness lies paradoxically in its quiet steadiness and precision. On behalf of all of the judges, Joy Harjo, John Yao, and myself, congratulations, Sandra. So well deserved. I love your work, have loved it for a long time. And I am very excited to have the pleasure of hearing you read for the first time, and then for us to be in conversation about the work. So I think that's the segue to you.
Thank you so much, Carl. It's a dream to get to talk to you. And thank you also to Poets and Writers and to the wonderful Jacksons who've made the event possible. Thank you also, everyone in the audience tonight, for coming. I'm going to read for about 15 minutes, and then I will be in conversation with Carl, and then I'll read a little bit more. So I'm going to read tonight from The Curious Thing, and this first poem is called The Protagonists. At one time, I asked for everything. When I saw how my love was squandered, I would secrete venom. But now I sing of the fat, sleepy little censor who has replaced me, whose disappointments create the life of the house. What does the human heart love? To go, to have so far to go in deepest night. The challenge now is to convey the supreme gaiety of the heart. It is a stone flung from a volcano. Something means everything. I had a long and mysterious fever when I was 4 years old. I was in bed for 5 months. My mother took the illness as some obscure anger of mine that took time to assuage, a root fire underground. This is what she told me once, anyway. I think I lived to myself. I like to imagine that I was at one time truly formless and uncaring, only yearning toward water and sleep, opening and closing. She said that in my fever, I even spat at her once. When I looked up into her face, my eyes were plain and bright, and she thought I was becoming something that she knew nothing about. And then it passed. For once, my spirit refuses the effort of understanding. Of course, I could not see what lay before me then. I was a child, wasn't I? I didn't have my heart set on anything. Whereas now, facts are more solid than I can stand. I need a few more ideas. A room of one's own is splendid. You don't know what your story is about when you begin it. And a love to measure past and future loves against. The danger may be that it carries the force of original thought, when in reality, it is just what you have had with you all along, the curious thing lying on your heart. Like that childhood fever, it's private, without account. I had a dream around that early time Or was it a real episode? My mother can't remember. I saw the most beautiful young woman on the street, and when she turned to look down and smile upon me, I saw that she had no teeth at all. Uncertain, the distortion had stopped in her face. But it was like a promise, wasn't it? The prediction of a poisoning of spirit, or its very healing. I am not sure now which. This next poem is about one of my favorite novelists, Jean Rhys. It's now within an hour of sundown of a late November afternoon. It was a beautiful day. The cold burned down any indignation. What won't degrade? The sick and distant, or near and black, bad-natured tides of want. Jean Rhys is saying, if I could jump out of the window, one bang and I'd be out of it. It isn't done to admit to this kind of need, but spirit needs a house, and the brief pageant of being escorted through the grieving joy of words set down right. The cold bores her, oppresses her. Life comes to bore her. She can strip a thing down. I want beauty, she adds. Hear me? I hear you, Jean. Yours is a voice disabused, and inside the cold of it, there's a sort of festival. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and read some love poems. This is called Naxos. Nothing consummates an idyll like abandonment. Zoom back, a marvel then to be here with you, nude like fruit and motiveless. The gray-leaved olive trees outside seem like young women, small, light, exciting. I love you. I wish there was some more original way of saying it. We drink our bitter coffees on the terrace, and the little dark stone of work that secures me, where is it? Millions of hard stars flood the sky each night, gentle wording defending mystery. My own timidity, pale as meal, will turn out to hold some ruthlessness too. I draw a line down the middle of my life. That's my night now, that's my day. Each day the sea is blue, then amber, then burning red. It declares love, it takes it back. The beginning of spring. All winter our house was warm and deaf, and I could just see the few white flowers outside the window. A true happiness occurred. Don't stand there now asking to be loved. We could feel the thawing in the river, low and guilty. I was still learning her particularity, all the beautiful colors in her face, even as my arms loosened dreamlike from around her. It all happened as my premonition told me it would. I loved her, but I'm not sure she loved me back. I know that many times I misspent her hope. It was flowering and it was finite. Then again, maybe I'll want a young wife in my old age. A bad man is the sort of man who admires innocence. It's a theme that breaks her heart, but not the one that's particularly unbearable. I could touch her at any time, all the while she was thinking of the work she wanted to do, despite her absolute, unreasoning devotion to me. How life surprises you. I had never been here before, and yet I thought I understood it all. What happens to old love? Tell me if you know. Classics. Actaeon turns into a stag, I say, as I spear the fourth oily olive on my toothpick. He saw her nakedness, which was appalling in the way it tested the air around it. Then come the hounds with their complicated names, the bang and the lurid viscera. Down this road, we can scarcely follow in words, but I always feel the clothes newly on her back and the low calm that comes when bad temper is spent. He is inhumanly excited. A rack of antlers emerges from his forehead as I talk. There's no stuffing it back in. He doesn't seem to notice as he pulls me into his lap. I sip my drink, and the bartender decants striped red straws with their determined gaiety into a glass jar, carefully wipes down the scarred tabletop. Humiliation. What of it? Formerly, I had a few feathers around my mouth, but nothing in my head. The future. Who or what can beseech you now? There are no origins or general principles. There is only this hole in the earth. Can you still be afraid then for what you don't have and what you'll never have? That despair is like an explosion of understanding. It can make you quite careless. But the pain of not knowing how to write, ah, says fate, you have a treat coming, and it was always so. And I'm just gonna close up this first part with this little poem. I had such a hard time with the ending. This one is called The Immoralists. In Goethe's famous ballad, a little heath rose tells a rough boy she'll prick him if he picks her, but he picks her anyway. Look how the erotic imagination honors you, little rose. It runs its kingly grace over you remorselessly. We go out into the light of a hot Sunday afternoon. None of us wants to grow old in a library.
Thank you, Sandra. What a beautiful reading. And it's funny because that last poem is one that I've spent a lot of time talking to my students about, and how it ends. I love how it ends. It's interesting that we could talk about endings, but that's actually not where I want to begin. But anyway, such a wonderful reading. Thank you. And so, as Sandra explained, we're going to be in conversation for about 15 minutes, and then there'll be a little more poetry, and then we'll open it up to the audience for any questions that might have emerged. All right, I hope these questions are okay. We'll see. Let's start with a large one to do with meaning. You have a sequence in The Curious Thing called A Shaggy Dog Story. Maybe people can mute let's make sure everyone's muted so we can focus. You have a poem in The Curious Thing called A Shaggy Dog Story. A shaggy dog story is a form of a story that traditionally plays with our human expectations of meaning, thwarting those expectations. Many of your poems seem to me to work this way. Not that they don't mean, but they seem to head elsewhere at the end than expected. You elsewhere identify a glimmer in adulthood of a time when things were, but didn't mean. So I guess I'm wondering, what is your relationship to meaning? And as a poet, to meaning making?
Okay, we are starting big.
Uh-huh.
my relationship to meaning, well, I'll start with the Shaggy Dog story, actually, or as a way in. That poem began, I love the notion of a Shaggy Dog story where, you know, it's a story that kind of meanders, and it's kind of anticlimactic, basically, like the ending.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like I'm always interested in the structure of jokes, like it's about upending expectations. And so I thought it was just the right title for this sort of sequence that I wanted to write about, kind of looking at a life in this sort of narrative way, but maybe contained in that form of the Shaggy Dog stories. I guess I believe that I can't necessarily come down on, you know, one kind of certainty or one kind of, you know, some kind of exactitude about meaning, but I can come at it in all these different ways. And that's part of the meaning or part of the pleasure of it. So I think for me, in a lot of ways, I mean, when you ask me, like, what's my relationship with meaning, it kind of feels like, you know, what's my idea even of poetry in the first place? Or that's how I sense it. I think there's a kind of harnessing of energies around meaning. Like I want to get that sense of intensity that I feel when I'm kind of on the brink of understanding something, or I intimate something, but I must use restraint or compression. I mean, this is why I'm a poet, to kind of, or those things have to be in tension. That's intensity and restraint for me to get kind of close to coming to something that feels meaningful, and not just kind of me expressing something or just plopping it out on a page. Like I kind of want that struggle always in the poem. So yeah, that sort of gets at.
That makes sense to me. I guess I feel like there's a, and I don't know if I'm imposing this because I myself feel it sometimes, but it seems as if there's a kind of frustration with how we're, as poets, in a sense, or maybe just as human beings, we're kind of cursed to want to find meaning and to make meaning. Whereas there are those times, there's another poem, maybe from an earlier book, where childhood seems a moment where for a while things can just be themselves, or there's a moment where the child doesn't have language for something, and there's a kind of freedom in not being bound to language, and then to think, well, now I have language and now I have to make this thing that I just felt before equal something.
Yes, there's a kind of, I guess in the book, there's on the one hand kind of a foreclosing of a lot of I guess what's unparaphrasable, but what's joyous in just being. But then I'd hope that, I mean, what I think is so wonderful about poetry, or wonderful about writing, is that search for that precision of at least trying to talk about that issue exactly. That's like the new pleasure, or the new meaning somehow.
I agree. Makes sense to me. Thank you. Okay, the questions, this is maybe a little less large, but maybe not. It's about art this time. At one point in your second book, The Wilderness, there's a mother who says to her daughter, art is never the ace in the hole. And in The Curious Thing, there's a line, there is more to life than writing, at the ending of one poem. While in yet another poem, happiness seems to be the absence of one's reflection, in the ice in that poem. But it made me think of self-reflection in the context of the lyric. And I think of the lyric as a space commonly for self-reflection. So how does all this square, or not, with the fact that you are a writer, and I would say a lyric one?
I'm glad of that characterization.
Yeah.
Well, especially because in this book, I feel I avail myself, I think, a lot of a more kind of discursive line, or in a lot of ways, and narrative and whatnot. But I do feel very pledged to the lyric. I think it's interesting, the mother that says, you know, art is not the ace in the hole. I mean, I think that's the struggle all the time. On the one hand, I think my ethic is just to be as precise as possible. Like my speakers believe, and I believe as a poet, in kind of the power of art and making art. But it might be away those moments of getting in what's beyond words still. That skepticism, it's like a strong interlocutor, always kind of making the poet or the maker person do their best or be at their strongest in being able to argue with that somewhat. I think I think also there's a way in which I just want to undercut the seriousness sometimes. It's because I believe so much in a kind of high radiance, high themes, first and last things. And but I guess it's my contemporaneity, or the way of getting my skepticism into is through those kinds of voices or those moments in the work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I appreciate that, actually. I think that is the challenge when you're one of those poets who talks about the big things, the big serious abstractions, but not wanting to seem overly serious about them, or at least to have the context of thinking, well, also we're just people, and and which is messy and funny and weird, and not all able to be laid out in beautiful lines all the time. So I agree. I was trying to make this seem really organic, like I wasn't reading questions, but it won't work. I'll start to say ridiculous things. So I'm going to go to this next question. But I feel like some of these are overlapping with what you talked about, narrative. So this is going to have something to do with that. Okay, here's a quote from the poem we were talking about, A Shaggy Dog Story. The other day, my friend declared that she favored straightforward narratives, clear, unassuming, and, if tart, amiably so. I felt the reproach. The implication is that you don't write straightforward narratives, or not amiably tart ones, or something like that. The curious thing, though, does feel like the most narrative of your books to me, inasmuch as a relationship and its dissolution seem to lie just beneath the surface, not for the whole book, but sort of in the middle. So I'm wondering how you see narrative and how it has evolved in the course of your books, all three of them. Also, one of your approaches to narrative, and sometimes I say to the idea of confession, seems to be to make narrative polyvocal. So we'll sometimes get the point of view of the man in the relationship, and sometimes the woman, and it's not always announced until midway. We'll realize, oh, this is a man talking, and which is an interesting way of critiquing the woman who, I don't know, it seems an interesting way. You kind of get both gendered ideas. And sometimes the narrative is understood against the backdrop of mythological narrative, as in the abandonment of Ariadne on Naxos, that the context for the poem you read, or the Actaeon poem. So these all seem ways in which maybe you're trying to play with narrative and maybe play with the idea of confession, but not be a confessional poet. That's a lot. I'm just throwing it all there at you.
It's interesting. Well, the first part of the question, I will say, I think where the impulse for narrative and for clarity, I remember with my second book, with The Wilderness, I just remember thinking, I don't know what this book is about yet. I write poem by poem anyway. It wasn't like I will have this book called The Wilderness with these themes or whatnot. But always my phrase to myself was, I want to say something clearly, and can I stand behind it or something? That was just the kind of the main thing. And then different things came up out of that. In this book, yes, I don't think it's very unclear, even though that speaker, is sort of teasing the writer or the poet about her poem. But I did want to be able to use the idea of narrative in talking, as you say, there's like in the backdrop, there's a love affair and the dissolution of a love affair. And not just the speakers, but different people. So much so of how we deal with that phenomenon, but so many things is by telling stories. But I think anyone that's in therapy or psychoanalysis, you always you question yourself. I mean, narrative is there's the unreliable narrator, and there's the truth or untruths and structures of the unconscious. And it was really fun for me to be able to speak from these kind of different perspectives and points of view, not just in perhaps the love affair, but even trying to imagine. There's a poem about a grandmother figure who I like to sort of project, what kind of story, what is my impulse? What kind of story do I want to make? And what does that impulse even say, about what actually happened? So in terms of the relationship, I guess to the confessional, I wanted the poems very much to feel personal, but or intimate without feeling personal. Like, I'm not afraid to say such and such because the public will now know X or Y about me, or hopefully if I'm doing it right. So I'm not afraid of being, maybe this is like with being a lyric poet. And so much of what I love about your work is that kind of intimacy and immediacy, and just the focus on the unapologetic focus on the centrality of the interior life. So I hope I'm not mischaracterizing your work.
No, not at all. No, I love that answer. And I was just thinking though how it has been hard for me to say exactly like this. I find your work extremely alluring, and it's interesting because yes, there is intimacy to it, but there's a weird detachment or slight, but not detachment in the cold sense, but a weird, so it's kind of like straddling both like the intimacy of confession and the more detached kind of narrative, sometimes with, as I said, like mythology or something like that, sort of adding an extra layer of distance. But it's almost as if the detachment then demands more intimacy of the reader, more intimate engagement. So maybe I was just thinking, I don't know how to characterize it, but that's one way in which I would characterize your work. And it's not something I've seen in anyone else. So it's very exciting. I'm also very interested in what you said about The Wilderness, your second book, and how you weren't sure what it was about. Do you feel you know what it's about now? Or is it okay for you to have things where I guess because I don't always know myself what my own books are about, and it's very difficult when like publishers say, describe it.
Yes, and jacket copy.
Yes.
Right. I know the honest thing would be it's a bunch of poems set in a particular order you want the reader to read them in.
Yes.
I mean, with The Wilderness, yes, I have some thoughts about, the sort of themes and things that it talks about. but the reason I also always bring that up is I tell my students too, don't worry so much if you don't know, exactly what this book or this collection that you're working on is going to be at. Again, and I know everybody works very differently, because I write individual poem by individual poem. One of the poems that finally worked for me in the wilderness, one of the first ones where I felt like, oh, I'm onto something. It's called Certainty, or one of the poems called Certainty in the book. And it's about Edward Taylor. And I thought, I don't want to write a whole book about Puritan ministers,
Yeah.
what's happening. But something about the things that were brought up in that poem. And I think in that book, the form, these sort of prose, like, lines, and the kind of disjunctiveness from going from one line to the next, there was something important about that for the book, but all this, after the fact. But it was exciting to just catch on to something and feel like, okay, here we go. Because I tried writing, there was a manuscript before that I thought it was going to be about X, and I just had to throw the whole thing out. I mean, I saved lines from it, but so yeah. I mean, now
go ahead. Mm-hmm.
No, I was just going to say, now I trust it more to figure that whatever's coming out of you, because it's you, it will have some kind of cohesion in the end. But we'll see. With everything, every book is different.
Sure. No, I agree. I'm also someone who writes poem by poem. I don't have a project in mind. So I'm very used to living in a kind of mystery or bewilderment, but it seems like I'm supposed to. But it means it's hard sometimes to sum up your own work. But that's also what brings me back to your work, is that it's not easily summed up. So I think that's part of its power. I think, since no one's stopping me, there's time to ask another question. Just making sure in the chat. No. Oh, Rachel's saying, oh, no rush. Okay. But you can transition back to Sandra in a minute or two. Okay, I'm going to. Shall I? Okay, well, then I'll just ask one last thing. I was going to ask about style, about form, but there's a poem by Stanley Kunitz called Touch Me, where he says, what makes the engine go? Desire, desire, desire. And this question and answer seem related to your question and answer in your poem, The Protagonists, which you read. What does the human heart love? To go, to have so far to go in deepest night. To what extent, if at all, do you think of yourself as a poet of desire, however you want to define desire?
Oh.
Or you can say, I desire to segue into my poems and read again, and that will be fine.
No. I think I love that. If I may be seen as a poet of desire and appetite, I'm happy with that. If that is all right.
That's how I feel. I feel it's not just desire, like sort of sexual desire, relationship desire, love, but desire for meaning, desire for precision, and appetite does seem the right word. A hunger that is constantly sort of moving through the poems. So, well, obviously, we should do this more often and just hang out and talk about poetry. But it would be great. But in the meantime, I know people would like to hear more poems. I believe you're going to read for another 10 minutes, something like that.
Yeah, okay, I shall. Okay. Well, speaking of a certain kind of desire, I'm going to read two poems with the same title, called Pastoral. Pastoral. When you called, I would come running, all my tags jingling. You'd grab a hank of my hair, and that would block out every thought. Our bodies swelled and stank in the heat, and we caved to it all day under a cloud of flies. I dreamt of strung pheasants in old paintings, a horse of thick paste biting my arm. I dreamt of nothing. Sticky and hungry, we were like bad-tempered children who stay out too long in the rain. They feel lonely, but have no language for it. You once gashed your head open. My leg twisted beneath me at a serene new angle. Our greed was largest and most generous. With the sun high behind us, we weren't two, but four, our shadows playing ahead of us in the melting summer grasses. We became almost ugly with use, our questions traveling too fast, no one stopping to answer. The cat looked into our faces through sleepy slits. I dreamt that I died. You weren't even very sad. You touched my face. It was already cold, and cold was beyond understanding. Pastoral. Drinks on the sunny patio. A hotel room key slipped into a little envelope. Fruit like flowers, flowers like birds. And though at the time I could not understand what he was saying, the sentiment landed, and it was like a head hitting the stone tiles of that patio. My temperament was blinked wide awake, like those birds of paradise with gaping orange beaks. Later, I heard that the cat got inside and the singing canary was chewed up. I was standing in the kitchen at the time. I thought of how dark and cold summers could be. Well, here are two poems, I guess, in talking about how maybe this brings together about how both narrative, confessional poems, and meaning making are kind of self-consciously intertwined. This poem is called A Walk Around the Park. We did not say much to each other, but we grinned. Because this love was so good, you sucked the rib bones, and I licked my fingers like a cat. Now I'm omniscient. I'm going to skip past the hard parts that go on for a very long time. Here's the future. I laugh because the pleasure was earned, yet vouchsafed, and I made room for what was dead past and what yet didn't exist. I was not always kind, but I was clear. Black box. We were in a small, grim cafe. She sipped pure black droplets from a tiny cup. Make him come back, she said, her voice like something brought up intact from the cold center of a lake. It was the kind of story I like, and I wanted to get it right for later. The hot morning in the cafe, feeling encroached on by a cloud of dusty ferns and creepers and the low earth of duty. I can't read a book all the way through, she said, and most days I'm only unhappy. My heart is always with the lovers. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit. This is a slightly longer poem called Portrait. All right. Portrait in Summer. This floral swimsuit is snarling. I'm regularly spoiling for a fight. Within me, fat is always curing like a ham in a shed. I go inside and read another psychosexual story set in a dreary seaside town. There are water crossings, one too many four-poster beds. Summertime, parole for academics. Long days, low yields. The flies stream into the kitchen, bringing friends, spouting aphorisms. The only major mystery left to life is death. I prop an ashtray on my bared stomach. I should grow thinner, more of less of me as I grow more solitary. But I haven't yet found a manner in which to get over my inconsistencies. On my way to fulfill some banal commission, I'm conscious of waiting for the season to run its course and of accumulating an anger around a simple truth. All perfect friendships eventually come to an end. Is it a story that must at all costs be dragged from the darkness? It starts to rain, and the streets smell like hot dogs, old pennies. The coffee shop owner barely lifts his head from the register as I approach the counter that's crowded with menorahs, crosses, and Buddhas. I meant to bring him a statue of Venus de Milo for good measure. It would all have the mixed effect of a moral dullness and deep fear. I notice this is the only place in town without a television. I like the angry pinch of an insight, the rough grasp of hard news. Yet in these very dog days, what might have been ennobling has often left me dull and vicious, a surprise I just wasn't onto. And I will end with two short poems. This is called Endings, which is why it's the penultimate poem that I'll read. Endings. The story has two endings. It has one ending and then another. Do you hear me? I do not have the heart to edit the other out. And this is a poem that's called Dadar. Then I became this stupid, trilling thing. What I desired was to become obscene. All the things I had loved up to then fell away in the long struggle between winter and spring. And then there was my body inside of my soul. It had different aspirations. What form does it take without the soul? Helpless in a hideous new way, and as patient as a mountain. The soul is an innocent before it. So when I say stupid, I simply offer meaninglessness. And when I say trilling, I only mean a leaving off of past sound. And when I am obscene, I am shorn of all expository passages. And so on, with things that are. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Sandra. Beautiful poems, wonderful. And we have quite a few questions that have tumbled in. So I'm scrolling through, find some. Here's one. I was not expecting to hear a poem about my island's first female writer, Jean Reese. What makes her one of your favorite writers? Also, have you visited Dominica, where she lived until the age of 16?
Oh, wow. No, I have not had the opportunity. but I think I actually can't remember exactly how I first. No, well, I came upon Jean Rhys through Wide Sargasso Sea, but then I went back to a lot of the earlier novels, and part of my just love of her work is just there's something I haven't quite figured it out how she does so much with tone. Not a lot happens necessarily. I mean, there are some basic plots, but it's usually a protagonist that is hanging around in different major European cities, in cafes, down and out in Paris and London.
Huh.
But there is something, I think all the things that we were talking about, desire, appetite, precision, this imaginative life, all that seems in there. And also, I would say, even though she had a very messy life, that's part of it too. Her what I know of her life, it's so disorganized and kind of crazy. And so I don't know how she was able to then sort of pull it together enough to write these kind of crystalline novels about very difficult feelings.
Mm-hmm.
So that is what I am into some of the time.
I love her novels. Yes, for those very reasons. There are a couple questions that I'm sure you've had asked before, but I know they're always important questions to people. One is, do you have any advice to beginning poets? The other one is, how do you know when a poem has ended, especially since you spoke about the difficulty of knowing about that one poem and whether it had ended yet?
Right. Okay. So advice to young poets. Practical advice, but you've heard it. Any one of your teachers would have told you. There's some stuff that you can learn from teachers and from getting advice, but so much is osmosis through reading, right? So read everything, read widely, read all the time. I feel always sort of like a mercenary magpie, just picking things up, I'm sure, or hearing rhythms, or just even sounds that I like, or what I don't know what it means yet, but I want to get at it in some way. Endings are really interesting. I think we were talking about endings in my class recently. I've been having students sometimes put the ending at the beginning. I mean, this is not like a new exercise, but I think it's often so much that we're trying to write into something, because we kind of have a linear way of going about it sometimes in poems. So I think just shifting physically that ending sometimes can just help you break out of what you thought might be the way the poem kind of resolves itself. The problem I had with the Immoralists, and that was a real problem, because the first two stanzas I had so early on, and there was something about it where I just really didn't want to tie it up neatly. I kind of wanted it to still be open. But I think there was something about the tone, because I mean, I'm talking about Goethe. There was something that I wanted to be more plain spoken and more. I wanted contrast. Maybe that's a better way to say it in thinking of endings. Sometimes that can be a place to go. But so much, I mean, I'm sure Carl, well, I was going to say, you must agree with me on this, but you teach, but it's so intuitive to me at the end of the day, right? So I guess you're honing your instincts all the time, but this is always after the fact, and like a Q&A, that I think, oh, this is what I was thinking, or this is how I did it. So
yes, absolutely agree. And then I feel as if I have to act as if I knew what I was doing, because it seems bad to say I have no idea. I just had a feeling this is the ending, and I
Right.
walked away. But that's often how it works.
Yeah.
So yes. Um, I think we have time. I'm just seeing if I have any, if I'm being cued to wrap up. I don't, am I? No. Okay, I'm going to ask another question. Among the other questions, well, there was one, first of all, on how you came up with the ordering of the poems in The Curious Thing. Was it purely intuitive? Did you have a sense of, once the poems were actually written?
Right, right. I think now I'm looking at the contents. I did try to group things, sort of the middle section is more where, more love poems, or those poems are all there. But I really wanted to begin, I think with any book, I mean, I've only written 3 books, but with anything, I want to front load it with the strongest poems. But I also think those poems kind of announced or touched on things that you would see later in the book, or concerns of the book, I will say. So, but it was very fun to kind of put it together. I knew what the first poem was going to be, I think, always. But it's interesting to always think of it's in 3 sections, what ends one section and what opens up the next section. And again, I know my students and other poets, we read books in order, but I still come across people, friends or readers that say, well, I read these handful, and I'm always like, oh, what do you mean? But you didn't go through the journey. But I realize, of course, that would be the case. You just kind of pick up and pick things out. So hopefully there's always a kind of energy that's sustained. That's one of the ways I thought about when I was putting it together as well. Like if you landed on this and the poem next to it, it would somehow spark or have some resonance still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's horrifying to think that people just decide to read a few poems out of context. But then I think I have to believe that all the poems can stand on their own,
Yes.
and they have a certain resonance if they're read in the way I want them to be read. But kind of like when something's anthologized and then it's
Yeah,
totally removed from the context.
absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
mhm.
But it's good. There's no, you know, um, I mean, I don't, it hasn't been the case where I've tried to, like, I've finished something and I thought, oh, it needs filler or something, that then it really wouldn't be able to stand on its own, I would think. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole other subject. Because many books do seem as if they're working that way, and I think that's one of the things I appreciate, not just the leanness of your poems, but also the leanness of the books themselves. And you kind of laughed when you said, "Oh, I only have 3 books," but I actually feel like um, having slender, powerful volumes seems better than having a whole bunch of like humongous books to me. So plus it's easier to return to a slim volume and sort of take the journey again, it seems. That's all my way of segueing to, I think, the conclusion, just because the cathedral bells have started to ring here. So does that mean I'm looking for my cue from Rachel to say, Carl, stop talking? Oh, it's Melissa who's going to come back and bring us
Well,
all home.
we don't want to stop you talking, but I think we'll end here. Thank you both so much.
Yeah.
Fascinating conversation, and thank you, Sandra, for being so generous with your work.
well, thank you, Carl. Okay, I would love to. Let's just talk all the time. um, and I'm just
No, not even about poetry. You can just talk about food.
oh yeah, I'm always noticing your recipes and your cooking on Instagram. So
Well, I think all of the 250 people on the Zoom call would love to be invited to listen in on that conversation. Thank you both so much. I want to thank again Susan and John Jackson and my Poets and Writers colleagues, especially Rachel Shooter and Bridget Irvine, who managed everything tonight. Thanks to all of you who are supporters of Poets and Writers. We can't do it without you, and we value your support so much. I think in the chat there is a link if you would like to make a donation to Poets and Writers. And another way you can support us is by buying Sandra's book or Carl's books through our bookshop link, which is also in the chat, and that helps Poets and Writers too. Thank you both so much. And thanks everyone for being here. Have a lovely night. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Congratulations again.
Thank you so much. Oh, it's fantastic to see people.
Everyone tumbling in.
There's Susan and John. Hello. So nice to see you there. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Oh my gosh. Yes, thank you.